next speaker, Dan Itse. Dan Itse. You know, they got this terminology, local celebrity. It's kind of a funny term, but Dan Itse really is a state celebrity. He is the creator of, the co-creator, I believe, of the HCR 6, and he's been on the Quebec program. I saw him there myself. And, you know, everybody is allowed to have somebody that they kind of think, you know, a few people that they kind of think are celebrities they get excited about. Dan's one of mine. You know, when I think about hearing Dan speak, I always get a little excited and jump around. And, so I'm not going to wait any longer. Dan Itse.
I'm not sure that I can. I didn't really prepare a whole lot for this. I spent the middle 3 days of this week up in the State House, and then I had to spend Friday doing all the things I didn't do in the other 3 days of the week. First thing I'm going to do, does this work? Hello? No? Yeah,
stay behind the podium.
Pull it out.
Pull it out, it's not?
Yeah.
Oh, it isn't? Okay.
Oh, we're trying to film you.
I was talking to people around the meeting tonight. Well, first of all, first thing, last time I was in this approximate location, I was dressed very differently, and it looked rather like Constitution Hall behind me. So I thought maybe I, you know, feels a little better. Now, one of the things that happened last year, and you all know I introduced HCR 6 a couple of years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, and then I introduced another House bill to keep the momentum going that carried on the ideas but created a committee. Of course, that also failed under the Democrat administration. But last session, there was a firearm freedom bill. There are actually two firearm freedom bills. One was mine, which carried penalties, and proffered the idea of holding federal officials accountable for breaking our state laws.
Right.
That big. And I didn't say much about it when it came to the floor. I decided to keep my powder dry. Pete Hinkle offered another firearm freedom bill, and that was when I chose to take to the floor. And what I did, now at that time the speaker, Speaker Norelli, had decided to put little hourglasses on the podiums so that we speak for shorter periods of time. And I walked down and I flipped the little 3-minute egg timer, and I explained nullification in less than 3 minutes. That's what we're going to do. Now, I'm an engineer. As an engineer, when you evaluate things, you evaluate, let's say, a mathematical formula in its extremum. 0, 1, -1, infinity, negative infinity. And you see if it holds true in the extreme. So, should there be, or is there such a thing as nullification? Well, let's say Congress passed a law requiring everybody under the age of 25 to enter into prostitution to pay off the national debt. And the Supreme Court upheld it. Would we all sit blindly by as a legislature, you're the legislature, and just accept this? Or would we, in our ire, stand up and say no? So obviously, if there is an absurd and dangerous law, we must have the power to nullify it. Second question at the time, have we ever nullified a law? Well, let's see. Back in 2006, we passed No Real ID out of the House. It failed. Maine became the first state to pass No Real ID, and then we came back the next session, the next term, and we passed Real ID. We have nullified a law. The second question, or the last question in this trio, is with the Firearm Freedom Bill, should we nullify the law? Well, most of our firearm laws at the federal level come via the Interstate Commerce Clause. The Interstate Commerce Clause, it has been stretched out of all proportion so that they pretend to be able to control your right to keep and bear arms through interstate commerce. Should we nullify that? And the answer to that question also was yes. So in less than 3 minutes, can we nullify? Have we nullified? Should we nullify? And the answer was yes to all three. It's a very easy problem. Now, as I said, and Tom Woods brought up, that the Interstate Commerce Clause has been bent out of all proportion. Who here knows what the purpose of the Interstate Commerce Clause was? And that is, in fact, written out in Federalist Paper 41. I'm 44. James Madison goes back and describes that there have been border disputes between the states. One of the main failures of the Confederacy was to regulate interstate commerce. And the purpose was to prevent states from exacting tariffs and duties on the goods that passed through their states, forcing other states to exercise commerce via the seas, and to avoid border wars between the states, which were happening. Does that sound like a farmer shouldn't be able to use his own wheat to bake his own bread because he's not buying wheat from another state?
Absolutely not. No.
So how do you combat this? Has anybody ever heard of the doctrine of interposition? An intermediate magistrate, say a state legislator, stands up to the superior magistrate when the superior magistrate exceeds their authority. That's the doctrine of interposition. Our founders were marvelously ingenious when they crafted our republics. Notice that's a plural. Not only did they divide the republics into 3 parts, so that if any single part tried to aggrandize itself and accumulate power, there would be 2 others to oppose it. It also became divided vertically. Starts with the people, then the states, and then the government of the United States. How many of you are from New Hampshire?
Not yet.
Okay. You have one of the best constitutions in the world. Well, back in 2006, there was a substantial controversy in our ballot, and our ballot was challenged by some Democrats and a Libertarian that with now these big districts that the judiciary had created, you now had multiple reps in a district, and there was fear of this phenomenon they called primacy. Those at the top of the ballot would get elected. And so the Supreme Court agreed with them, and they told the Secretary of State not to publish the ballot as the legislature passed. And I had really begun to fall in love with our Constitution and studied a little bit, and I happened upon this article. Article 29, Part 1. And what it says, as I try desperately to turn to it, is the power of suspending the laws or the execution of them ought never to be exercised but by the legislature or authority derived therefrom, to be exercised in such particular cases as only the legislature shall expressly provide for. And I argued this up and down on the what's known as the HRA listserv, and eventually we got 2 special sessions, one in the House and one in the Senate, and we passed an order telling, or we tried to pass an order, it actually failed because there was an amendment made, but we tried to pass an order saying that the Secretary of State had to publish the ballot as we had passed. That failed. But at the end of it, a good friend of mine, Representative Paul Murski, said, "You've been making these arguments about this, and you really need to write a commentary on the Constitution." I said, You really mean that, Paul?" He said, "Yes, I do." And so, I did. I called it the People's Liberty, and I do have it available. But it forced me to go through our state constitution. And I found such wonderful gems. It also, I began going through the other state constitutions. One of the things that's said about ours is it's a knockoff of Massachusetts. Not so. I'm an engineer. I did a spreadsheet. And I did fundamental liberties across the top and state constitutions across horizontally. And only New Hampshire has every one, if only implicitly. It was the last of the state constitutions. We also had the first state constitution, but that was the last of the state constitutions. So it wasn't just a knockoff of Massachusetts. They went back and looked at all of the other constitutions, and they picked and they chose, and they took the best out of each one. Now we talked about, others up here have talked about that you are the sovereigns of this state, that the people are the sovereigns of their states. How do you know that? Anybody hazard a guess? Other than JR. Okay, where does it say so? What does it say? Part 1, Article 8, all power originating in and being derived from the people. The officers and representatives of government are their agents and substitutes, and at all times accountable to them. That means that when I'm up in Concord and I'm making a vote, it's not me voting. It is the people of Epping and Fremont voting in my person. I'm pushing the button for them. Now, if they have a representative who told them what his principles were, I should have brought one of my campaign signs. You know, my name, my party affiliation, pro-life, pro-land, family, pro-liberty. The Constitution's first, last, and always states' rights. I think they knew what they were buying. One of them, I had two of them in 4x8. But when I'm up in Concord, it's not me. It's the people who sent me there. You heard Part 1, Article 7 quoted to you in part earlier. But it's important to know the whole thing, and it's important to know its history. The people of New Hampshire said in 1784 that they are sovereign. And then they joined the United States, and then they ratified again that they were sovereign. That the people of this state have the sole and exclusive right of governing themselves as a free, sovereign, and independent state, and to exercise every right, power, and jurisdiction pertaining thereto, which is not or may not be by them hereafter expressly delegated to the United States of America in Congress assembled. That's before and after we ratified that Constitution. So what did we mean by it? Are there any questions? I don't think so. We are a government where the people are sovereign. They delegated. You have delegated by moving into this state or not moving out if you were born here. You have delegated to what I call the goobers in government a portion of your power. That power is all originally yours. When we joined the United States of America, you, the people of New Hampshire, further delegated a portion of that power to the United States. Now, that's rather like a power of attorney. And this gets right back to nullification. If you delegated some of your power through a power of attorney to an employee or some other agent, and you find that they're abusing that power, do you have to sit blindly by and accept it? You rescind it. You tell them that they're doing what they ought, and you slap them off the side of the head. That is the right and the rightful exercise of the people of New Hampshire when they find that those of us up in Concord or those whom we have sent down to Washington are abusing our power. We have every right to rescind or reclaim or to hold them accountable for misusing that power.
Yes, you do. That's right.
This is your power. Now, again, I said I don't really know where I'm going, but
Don't draw attention to it.
I want to bring you another idea. What does it mean to be a state, the state of New Hampshire? When the people of New Hampshire coined themselves a state in 1776, January 1776, 6 months before the Declaration of Independence, what were they thinking? What was in their mind? How did they perceive themselves? I learned of a fellow who wrote in 1778 The Law of Nations, Emeric de Vattel. And he writes of sovereign states in federation. Finally, several sovereign and independent states may unite themselves by a perpetual confederacy without ceasing to be each individually a perfect state. They will together constitute a federal republic. Their joint deliberations will not impair the sovereignty of each member, though it may, in certain respects, put some restraint on the exercise of it, in virtue of voluntary engagements. A person does not cease to be free and independent when he is obliged to fulfill engagements which he has voluntarily contracted. I'm always struck by the original Constitution of New Hampshire. And again, it's fun. You need to know the history. New Hampshire had the first real land battle of the American Revolution. It was brief. Nobody died. It was the Battle of Fort William and Mary. The people of New Hampshire had just been heavily taxed to pay for providing materiel for Fort William and Mary. And shortly thereafter, the king had forbade the further importation of arms to the colonies. And the people saw this as a bad sign. They knew that they had just bought these munitions and they regarded them as their own. And down in Boston, the Sons of Liberty became aware that General Gage was planning to reinforce the garrison at Fort William and Mary, which at that point was comprised of 11 men. And so Paul Revere, not the midnight ride you think of, but in December of 1774, that's the prior year, rode up to Concord and apprised the New Hampshire patriots that these reinforcements were coming. So John Langdon, John Sullivan, and a third individual whose name escapes me at the moment, they gathered together 400 patriots of the Seacoast region, and they together stormed the fort. The sergeant in charge of the garrison, being a citizen of Londonderry, not really wanting to fire on his neighbors, fired over their heads. There was a scuffle inside, and the patriots came in and they took all the shot and powder. Next day, they thought better of it, they came back, and they took all the small cannon, too.
Pay attention.
That was the munitions that they used to rescue the Patriot force at the Battle of Bunker Hill. It may have been the munitions that General Gage was seeking when he marched on Lexington and Concord. But during the ensuing year, anarchy really broke out in New Hampshire. And people were getting robbed and accosted, and there was no government to hold them accountable. And at some point there was a civil magistrate who took refuge in Governor Wentworth's house, and the people were demanding that the governor turn this gentleman over to them. So they rolled a cannon up to his front door. I don't know if the official was ever turned over, but from that point on, the governor and his family took refuge in Fort William and Mary. And this is the paragraph that refers to that in our original Constitution, January 1776. The sudden and abrupt departure of His Excellency John Wentworth, Esquire, our late governor, and several of the council, leaving us destitute of legislation and no executive courts being open to punish criminal offenders, whereby the lives and properties of the honest people of this colony are liable to the machinations and evil designs of wicked men. Therefore, for the preservation of peace and good order, and for the security of the lives and properties of the inhabitants of this colony, we conceive ourselves reduced to the necessity of establishing a form of government. To continue during this present unhappy and unnatural contest with Great Britain. Protesting and declaring that we never sought to throw off our dependence upon Great Britain, but felt ourselves happy under her protection, while we could enjoy our constitutional rights and privileges. And that we shall rejoice in such a reconciliation between us and our parent state can be effected and shall be approved by the Continental Congress, in whose prudence and wisdom we confide. Notice the term of art there. And I notice it all throughout Eric D. Vattel's writings. The words nation and state are synonymous. They regarded Great Britain as their parent state. And with the breakdown in relations, with the deprivation of their constitutional rights and privileges, they formed themselves as a free, sovereign, and independent state. It was mentioned in the Declaration of Independence that each of those states perceived themselves on equal standing individually with Great Britain. During the War for Independence, we formed a confederacy that was formalized in the Articles of Confederation, I believe in 1782, though I could be corrected.
Proposed in 1754 by Franklin.
But not consummated. I want you to consider, and I'm not taking a side on this because there's no writing to define it, but I want you to consider. It's 1782. You have just fought a war, a bloody war, in your own backyards to free yourselves from those who you perceived as your former parent state. Because that state, having no written constitution, had deprived you of your understood constitutional rights and privileges. And then you go enter into a perpetual confederacy. That phrase, perpetual confederacy, from the Articles of Confederation, not existing in the Constitution for the United States, is the phrase upon which the Civil War was fought. What did they mean by perpetual confederation?
Perpetual union.
Perpetual union, thank you. Did they mean it was something that could not be broken? are something that existed in perpetuity? Did they conceive themselves as being unable to resist tyranny? Or did they say, as Part 1, Article 10 of our Constitution says, government being instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the whole community, and not for the emolument of any one man, family, or class of men, that whenever the ends of government are perverted and the public liberty manifestly endangered, and all other manner of redress are ineffectual, the people may, and of a right ought. And that word ought is the moral imperative that occurs, the only other place it occurs in such a phrase is in the state of Maryland's Constitution, ought to reform the old or establish a new government. The doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. When we find our governments infringing upon our natural rights, then it is our obligation, our duty, to stand up to them, to reform or replace them. There have been several great advances in liberty throughout history. The first big one was the Magna Carta. That came after the Baronial Rebellion in 1260. Then there was the English Bill of Rights that occurred in 1689 after the Glorious Revolution. Then there was our Constitution, which occurred after our Civil War against Great Britain. A civil war which was not without precedent, because the English themselves had a civil war in the 1620s. This was not, it would be as though we had had a civil war relative to us right now in the mid, say early 1900s. That's how close it was in their memory. Every advance in liberty has been by the force of arms or the threat thereof. That's why we have a Second Amendment. No government has ever willingly recognized the liberty of subjects and citizens. But ultimately the burden falls upon us as individual citizens. Every time we, like government, restrict the ability of we the people to govern our own lives, it steals a little of our liberty. Every time we let government take a decision out of the hands of we the people, like healthcare, it makes us less responsible for ourselves and our families, destroying our independence. Every time we let government take away the risk of failure, it makes us less resilient, robbing us of the ability to succeed. Every time we allow government to do for ourselves what we ought to do for ourselves or each other, it makes us a little bit more the slave. One of my favorite lines, there is no difference between tyranny at the point of a gun or a knife and tyranny at the point of a pen. We hold tremendous power over you up in Concord. We have a pen. John Stephen had a pen. John Lynch used that line in his St. Patrick's Day roast. He had a pen. That pen to veto or sign holds tremendous sway over your lives.
Dan Itse for governor.
Maybe someday, not under my own steam.
With our pens.
They make me lose. Okay. Everybody, you've often been told that you can't fight City Hall. But in 1776, we fought the greatest city hall in the world. And we won. That's what you have to remember. When we exercise, those of us who are up in Concord, the people who are your state reps and your state senators, Jim Forsyth is here, I thought. Okay? They are the most important people you can elect. You heard that said earlier. We have the greatest ability to do you damage. And we are your only defense against the federal government. It is our job to lock arms and stand between you and the federal government. Hold up our constitutions. And like Gandalf on the bridge, say to them, you shall not pass. Now, you all remember HCR 6. How many of you know what the sovereignty resolution is for this year? Okay. It has already passed the floor once. It's now in the Constitution Committee. We will be, which I happen to chair. We will be having our executive session on Tuesday. I think it will probably come out with a not to pass. It will come to the floor on March 30th. When it came to the floor the first time in the end of February, the gallery was empty.
It's a Wednesday.
Right, no, the 30th is, yes. Our executive session is Tuesday the 22nd. I hope and pray to God that the gallery will not be empty on Wednesday the 30th. It is House Concurrent Resolution 19. Properly stated, a resolution affirming states' powers based upon the Constitution for the United States and the Constitution of New Hampshire. When it came through the last time, it passed 228 to 108. If it had to be signed by the governor, it isn't veto-proof, but very close. Fortunately, he doesn't get to sign it. A resolution affirming states' powers based on the Constitution for the United States and the Constitution of New Hampshire. Whereas, the Constitution of the State of New Hampshire, Part 1, Article 7 declares that the people of this state have the sole and exclusive right of governing themselves as a free, sovereign, and independent state, and do and forever hereafter shall exercise every right, power, and jurisdiction pertaining thereto, which is not or may not hereafter be by them expressly delegated to the United States of America in Congress assembled. I won't read the whole thing, it would take too long.
Give us that number again, please.
HCR 19.
Thank you.
I do want to read you something that I think is very important. It's about, the whole thing is about 4 pages. I'm going to give you the last whereas. Whereas, the Constitution for the United States of America guarantees to every state in this union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion and upon application of the legislature of a state or the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. Therefore, there exists a class of acts by the Congress of the United States, executive orders of the President of the United States of America, or judicial orders by the judicatories of the United States that constitutes a direct challenge to the Constitution for the United States of America by the government of the United States of America, including, but not limited to, requiring involuntary servitude or governmental service other than pursuant to or as an alternative to incarceration after due process of law. Establishing martial law or a state of emergency within one state comprising the United States of America without the consent of the legislature of that state or authority derived from that body. surrendering any power not delegated or not delegated to any corporation or foreign government. Now therefore be it resolved by the House of Representatives and the Senate concurring that the state of New Hampshire urges its co-states to charge one of its committees with the duty of communicating the proceedings of its legislature in regard to the government of the United States of America to the corresponding committees of the legislatures of the several states, to assure them that this state continues in the same esteem of their friendship and union, which it has manifested from that moment at which a common danger first suggested common union, that it considers union for specified national purposes, and particularly to those specified in their federal compact to be friendly to the peace, happiness, and prosperity of all the states. That faithful to that compact, according to the plain intent and meaning in which it was understood and acceded to by the several parties, it is sincerely anxious for its preservation. That it does also believe that to take from the states all the powers of self-government and transfer them to a general and consolidated government without regard to the special delegations and reservations solemnly agreed to in that compact is not for the peace, happiness, and prosperity of these states.
Yes.
That is what will be voted upon the floor of the House on March 30th.
You know what time?
Well, we begin with C. We're the third committee in the roster. Therefore, it will most probably be early in the day, assuming that we go in alphabetical order as we usually do. So I would guess it to be before noon, depending on what other business occurs before. It is the correlating bill 2 years ago that caused a ruckus in the gallery, to be concise, and inspired the Democrats to prohibit firearms in the State House. My fault.
Attaboy, Dave.
Rescinding that was one of the first actions of this legislature.
Yes, yes, yes.
There are a number of representatives, some of whom may be in this hall or still be in this hall, who were in the gallery that day. And this year, they had the opportunity to vote upon that resolution. I hope that I will see many faces in that gallery on March 30th. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
So I just had an email forwarded to me. Anyone close by might be able to see it. It says, Nullify now at Southern New Hampshire University has been canceled. We're not here. I don't know if it's fun to share. I don't know. I guess you're doing something good if the spammers are getting you.
Disinformation.
But if you guys get any emails like that when you get home, rest assured you were here.
We're not on here.
That wasn't supposed to be till 6 o'clock.
Talk about the nefarious plans of evil men.